Hey guys, Jeff Francoeur here. Thanks for listening to our content, and please like and subscribe. Back with Pure Athlete, Ben Watson. Man, what can you say about him?
And he was awesome. And I have to start this out by saying, you tell a story about how Ben's impacted your life. We won't give it away here in the intro because you're about to do it, but really cool story. Wasn't aware of that at all.
Yeah. He, we talked a lot about character, one of our pillars, and if you could probably put his face on the pillar as just such an incredible, representation of what character is.
Yeah, I won't give it away either, but I did spend 3 days with him when I was in high school and impacted my life immensely. And you can see he continues to do it at all the levels that he's doing it. And, I think the cool thing is, he's got 7 kids, and he talks a lot about they're probably eventually, as he said, going to get into the travel ball, some sort of, whether it's basketball, volleyball, baseball, softball. But I think it's cool that it's a guy that, I think one of the great things is, I love what he said, your kids can do a lot of stuff, but there's a sacrifice for it. And what are you willing to sacrifice?
And he said they're kind of on the outside looking in right now.
Yeah.
He's kind of waiting his time, really kind of surveying. Gosh, just such a wise dad to kind of say, we're going to get into it.
Yeah.
But we're not going to jump into it
And I think one thing that was so cool, right? He said, no matter if your kid practices 6 hours a day for 365 days, there's no guarantee that your kid will get a scholarship, that will get a play at the next level. And I think that's cool because I think we never, I don't know if we've heard that said like that. And I think that's a great thing. No matter how hard you work, it might not be enough.
Yeah. What I loved about this episode is, you can tell that Ben loves sports, but he has it in the right perspective. Yeah. And I think there's some great messages in here that we try to convey to parents about, what are your parenting goals, and your sports goals fall up under that. But he delivers that message in a really unique way, I think.
He also has some really good insight on college football and what's going on today. He's got a very, maybe a contrarian view than a lot of folks is on the state of college football and where it's headed.
Yeah, and I think lastly, we had Tony Dungy on a while ago. You talk about a man of faith, and I think that's Ben too. You talk about a guy that's very convicted in his faith and how he walks about life. So very powerful, and enjoy this episode. Before we get to the podcast, if you have middle school or high school kids that play sports and you don't want to fundraise like me, we got you covered. My buddy Chris Carneal owns Booster. Chris?
We help schools and sports teams raise funds in a super fun and engaging way. In fact, the last 22 years, we've raised $750 million, and we can't wait to help you. Choose booster.com.
Welcome back to Pure Athlete. I'm Jeff with Britt. Sorry.
I know we look alike. I know.
But guys, I'm excited about today's guest. More importantly for me, he's a special guy for me. He actually was my huddle leader in Black Mountain, North Carolina, and led me to Christ in 2000.
I did not know that.
He was, awesome. Yes. So he's always been a special guy to me, even though he probably had no idea at that time that he led me to Christ and who I was. But I played in the NFL for 14 years, first round draft pick by the Patriots, all this, but one of the great guys, character-wise. Ben Watson, thanks for joining us.
Man, it's great to be with you. It's just amazing how things come somewhat full circle in a way. And really, really proud of you and what you're doing right now. But also, as I've heard your testimony, it's crazy. When I was at Georgia, I didn't know you, but your legend had infiltrated Athens. And I remember being in Athens, not being from Georgia, and hearing about this dude that was this like phenom and all these sports and stuff like that and everything. And then getting a chance to meet you, I did not know, the impact of Black Mountain and that time together. But this goes to show that God uses people and his spirit is everywhere. And I grew up going, I don't know if you knew this, but I grew up going to Black Mountain.
I did. Yeah. I remember you telling us.
I got scars on my back from falling down the mountain.
Well, I still remember one of my favorite things, and I know you're not going to remember this, but, I went up there, and I grew up going to church, but you were our huddle leader, and we were playing basketball in that little gym, remember? And I was like getting really competitive, and I remember you telling me, like, man, you need to relax. Like we were doing, he's like, I'm competitive, this is fun, but, you had such an impact on me that weekend, and, I know you've had an impact on so many more people than just me, and that's, one of the main reasons that I've told these guys we wanted to have you on because, as I mentioned it, one of our pillars, man, is we have grit, we have all this different stuff, but it's character, and you have done it as good as anybody that we've seen. So we appreciate what you stand for and what you do.
Oh, man. Again, it's an honor to be with you guys. Appreciate it.
So tell us a little bit before we get into youth sports, kind of what you're doing right now. I know 7 kids. I have 4. I have no idea how you have 7 kids, but how y'all are doing.
That's a different podcast, but that's part of it. Glory to God. No, we are, man, we're busy. We're into everything. The kids are ages 15 down to 5. And so we had 5 in a row. Unfortunately, we had 2 miscarriages trying to have an even number 6. And then we tried one more time and we got twins. Don't know where that came from. Twins, like, do not run in the family. They just showed up. Identical twin boys that are 5 years old now. So we're in the summertime. Personally, I've been retired for this will be the 4th or 5th season coming up. My last game was January of 2020. So time flies. Been involved with some broadcasting with SEC Network, college football. Also work with an organization called Human Coalition, and we provide services to pregnant women. We also engage in advocacy on the federal and state level, and then do a little bit of speaking here and there. Still involved with FCA a bit and All Pro Dad. So just doing a lot of different things. The main thing, however, is trying to keep 7 people alive and keep my wife and I sane in the process.
Ben, that's awesome. I've got a similar story in that we went for one more and ended up with identical twin boys.
Are you serious?
As well. They're 22 now, so you got a fun ride ahead. It's pretty awesome.
So you saying there's hope, or are you saying like God bless you?
Well, I'll give you a little bit of both. A little bit of both. Hey, I think we should start, and a lot of times we start with a youth sports story, but you brought up character.
Yeah.
Let's mix it up a little bit. I think, Ben won the Bart Starr Award. As you said, Jeff, he's known for being a great character guy. So why don't we jump in and just talk about character a little bit? And Ben, if you don't mind, I'd love to hear how you define character.
How to define character? Well, character is the soul of who you are. It's the person that you are. Not necessarily when no one's looking. That's a popular definition for integrity, and that's part of it. But I think character, when we think about somebody like David, and the verse that sticks out to me is when he says, "One thing I desire of the Lord, that which I seek, to dwell in the house of the Lord forever, and to gaze upon his beauty." And you think about David's character, how God saw his character, as opposed to how we saw the individual things that he did in his life that weren't always that great. And the character is the essence of who you are. It's the posture that you live your life with. It is the direction that you're going, even if you step outside of character at times, because all have sinned and fall short. And so your character is, when I talk to my kids about character, I talk to them about fruits of the Spirit. I talk to them about, who they want to be. I talk to them about things like integrity. But character to me really is the essence of who you are. And in my estimation, in my experience, there is no character that is worthwhile outside of one that's totally submitted to the Lord.
Man, that's awesome.
Ben, did your talk about your upbringing with your parents in terms of how they instilled that virtue in you?
Yeah. So my parents, they live in Rock Hill, South Carolina. My father is still pastoring. That he was working for a church planting ministry, which is why we moved from Virginia to South Carolina back in '96. And the plan was for him to be there 5 years and to move on. Well, 30 some years later, they're still there. I'm like, dude, you're supposed to be gone in 5 years. The guy changed his plans or what? But they're still there. I would say that in my upbringing, I'm the oldest of 6 kids. I do think that birth order has something to do with part of just the way I view life, possibly character. But my parents instilled in us really a love for people, an attitude of service, a willingness to get outside of our comfort zone a bit, and most importantly, they instilled in us a reverence for Scripture and for the Lord. Both believers, both obviously, as we always say, don't live it perfectly. But what we saw watching them were 2 people who were dedicated to trying to live as the Lord would have them to live, at home, at work, in all the different spheres that they were involved in. That's what we saw. And so for us as kids, that presented a challenge at times. I had times where, especially later on in life, even in sports, where I struggle with perfectionism. And so there's this balance as parents sometimes where we want to demonstrate, the truth of Scripture to our kids, and we want to live as God will call us to live as believers and followers of Christ. But at the same time, it's imperative that we are honest with them and show them some of our missteps and how God still forgives us the same way they need forgiveness. I struggled with that a bit, especially with my father, being that he was a pastor. People looked to him for guidance, and he's still my hero, by the way. But they instilled that in all of us. I would say that my father is the one who actually led me to the Lord at a very young age. And so he's always been the one for me to go to when I had questions about the word, and the one who pushed me really on and off the field.
That's awesome. I want to ask you about, in our context, and I'm sure you talk to young athletes quite a bit, young people. We all know that there's a lot of athletes out there who are not character folks, and there's a lot that are. What would you say to young people who are young athletes about the importance of developing character?
Well, it's kind of twofold. When I think about young athletes, I also always think about young parents. And for most athletes, there's somebody in their life, whether it's both their parents, one of their parents, a mentor or something. And I feel like too often we put a lot of onus on the athlete and not enough on the parent. How are you guiding these young people? And so it's twofold. When I have an opportunity to speak to athletes, I'll speak to the parents as well, or to the caretaker as well, or the coach as well. What are the things that you're instilling in your athletes as a coach? How are you coaching? Are you pushing them on the field or the court? Or the course? Yes. Are you developing their skill set? Yes, you have to do that. The name of the game is winning. I don't care what level you're in. You play to win the game, as you say. But within that, when you think about developing young men and young women, our goal as coaches or our goal as parents is to develop these young people who are going to one day be the adults that take the reins and do the same thing for the next generation. And so character will always find you out, a lack of it. Character for a young person will be the obstacle or the hurdle that will keep you from greatness. Character will be the thing that is your Achilles heel, even if you become great in the world's eyes, but you become a fool or you're lacking in your home life. Character is a thing that you can never buy, but you can always work and build towards in your life. And quite honestly, character is the most valuable asset an athlete will have. Now, that's difficult for many athletes to hear at this point. Each generation has their NIL, or each generation has their next step, their next thing, the next contract. For each generation that happens. But for young athletes, it's important that they understand the importance of character, but it's also important that they see it demonstrated, because we learn a lot by watching those that we hold in high esteem.
I love that. Ben, one thing too, not just character, but you were a great teammate. And I've talked to numerous guys that you played with. So what do you say to kids that, look, you're around 53 guys in the locker room. You are not going to get along with every guy. You do not align values with every single guy, but yet you were able to come around these players and help them become better on the field and off the field. What do you say to young athletes that might not love some of their teammates? How do they go about that day in and day out?
Man, well, the good thing about football is there's 53 other guys or 52 other guys. So I really don't have to be around you all the time if I don't like you. Now, if it's a sport like I don't know, basketball, or you got a smaller roster.
Yeah, that's true.
You got to, I can be on the other side of the locker room from you. There have been times where there have been guys within my position room who I didn't particularly care for. But I'll say this, I loved all of my teammates. And even if I didn't agree with their lifestyle choice, I loved them. And I think that as an athlete, you can understand that when you go through things like, practices or wins and losses, when you see guys in a vulnerable state, or when a guy is just really, really calloused and inside there is a hurt there. And I always found it to be especially later in my career, it was always my goal to impact somebody in the locker room for Christ. It was always my goal to be someone who, even if they didn't understand me, they lived a life that's totally different from me. They're from the other side of the tracks. When something came up in their life, I wanted to be the one that they said, man, I'm going to go ask Benjamin because I think he may have an answer for me. They have never talked to me. There have been guys that I played with that I may have had one conversation with, Jeff, and then years later, 5, 6, 7, even 10 years later, there's a guy right now, 10 years later, I reconnect with them, and it was something that they watched me do or that I said to them that impacted their life in a positive way. And so that's what it means to me to be a teammate. Like I want you to perform your job and do it well. We all need each other to perform well and to win games. But you spend so much time with these people, you have to look at it as a family, as almost a mission field of sorts, to where you want to be someone that's a reliable, a friend, and you never know the impact of that years and years down the line. Some of my favorite memories in football were not, and you know this, as athletes, some of your favorite memories are not winning or something that happened that was sports related. It was something that happened. It was a conversation. It was a moment. It was tears. It was an embrace. It was those things that happened off camera that you really remember and the things that you cherish.
Ben, we hear now a lot of experts talking about that kids really haven't changed so much over the last 20 years or so, but the parents are the ones that have changed. You've been through this cycle. You played. Now you're a parent. You saw it when you played in high school and college and pros. And now you're seeing your kids. Do you agree with that statement that the issue right now with character that we have is parent related as opposed to kid related?
That's complex. I think for us, we are just full transparency. We are watching on the sideline of the travel sports culture. We're not in it. My oldest daughter is really heavy into ballet. I mean, she's multiple days a week. But then the next one is into track, and we haven't gotten into travel basketball or travel baseball or any of those sorts of things. So we're watching like, man, do I really want to jump into this double dutch? Do I really have the feet for this right now? So I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But what I hear is that there's a lot of busyness in it. But I also see that there's a few different dynamics. One of them is technology that has changed. And what I mean by that is when I grew up, and I hate when old people say when we grew up, but when I grew up, we didn't have highlight tapes that we could just upload to social media very quickly. There wasn't recruiting that started in 8th grade. Maybe for Jeff here.
No. I was not. No, I hear you.
There wasn't recruiting in 8th grade. Like everything is starting earlier because we have more access and coaches are able to to watch film more readily, and kids are able to put these are all good things in my opinion. I don't think those are bad things, but because of that, I think that parents now, the same way our parents compared to their parents, I think do feel pressure to get their kids out there. I know parents who have a Instagram page for their kids, even though the kids don't have Instagram, they feel like in order for their kid to get noticed and to get a scholarship, they've got to curate and manage a fan account for their child, even though their child isn't even on Instagram. And so I think that many parents are feeling the pressure more in different ways than they did in past generations, because these scholarship opportunities and these opportunities to go to all-star games are largely based on who sees you and when. And in order to do that, your kid has to be good. You have to get your kid hours, time on task, and you have to get your kid to be seen by the powers that be. So I do think that parents are dealing with it. I also think that there are a lot of parents that are dealing with guilt because while they feel the pressure to provide their kids with these opportunities, they still feel as parents like they want cohesiveness within their family. And there's something about sitting at home for dinner at night as a family, and they feel like they can't do it because their kid has practice late and this kid is over there and this kid is over there. And I'll see you all when we get back at night and we're exhausted and we never have a conversation. So to answer your question, I do think that there are different pressures. I think every generation has their pressures, but I do think that parents today in our age bracket are just dealing with some different pressures than perhaps our parents did. And I also think that, the kids are feeling the pressure as well.
And I love that, because that's what you'll see it if the kids start getting into it. We talk about all the time. It's good. I think travel sports, we say on here, it's a good thing if it's done the right way. And I think there's having guardrails on it. And I've said it, like our family, we have dinner every Thursday and Sunday night as a family, like 2 nights a week, no matter what. Those nights are for us at the dinner table. If we get another night, great. But those 2 nights. And I think what you'll find, though, is kind of what you're saying is parents are being told as their kids are younger now, if your kid's not in this, he's going to be left behind. She's going to be left behind. And so, my question is how do you fight that narrative? Like how do you tell these parents? We keep trying to say it on here, so many times. It's okay if your kid's not at every sport, every practice. How do you fight that narrative?
Well, what I was going to say, when you were saying that was, they're right. Your kid might get left behind. Matter of fact, your kid will get left behind. Are you okay with that? And what are they being left behind from? That's the question.
Yeah.
What are you willing to give up? So your kid's going to be left behind. I mean, the fact of the matter is this: if kid A is going to practice every single day of the year, 365 days, and you're only going for 50 days, you're going to be left behind, as in you don't have much time on task. But what did you gain from those other days that you weren't there? And so really it's a value proposition. Is what are your values as a family? You said that your values are having dinner together, and you're going to dedicate these 2 days. That's in concrete. We're having dinner together because you feel it's important that your family gets together for a meal at least twice a week. You're not giving that up. So the encouragement to parents is decide what your value system is. What are your non-negotiables? And then that way you set expectations. And that way you can also feel okay when you realize that, my kid is left behind, but we got this instead. And this is something that is very, very important to us and our family and your development as a child, because your development as a young person is not simply your athletic prowess. Your development as a young person has a lot of different factors and spheres and parts to it. One of them is academic. One of them is your sports. One of them is how you communicate with adults and how you communicate with your siblings or your friends. One of them is your spiritual development. And so there are all these different things. Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and men, Luke 2:52. We've got to be more than just athletes, even though that's important. And so that's what we're bumping up against. With us, with 7, if everybody's in one thing, it's like, we've got a lot going on. And so we have tried to keep dinners sacred as much as we can. on some of the days my oldest daughter isn't there. The rest of us sit down. She starts ballet at 6:30 sometimes at night, and so she's not there. But the rest of us have dinner, and then when we're able, we do it together because we feel like that's an important time for our family. So you tell parents, look, yeah, they are going to be left behind. And then the other part of that is something I'm sure you've spoken about a whole lot on this podcast and in other places. There's no guarantee that because your kid goes to 365 practices a year, that they are ever going to get paid by anybody. I'm talking about NIL, colleges, pro, freaking overseas. There's no guarantee they're going to get paid by anybody to perform their sport simply because they go to these practices. But what you can as a parent guarantee is how much time you have to pour into your children.
Yeah, and there's a better guarantee that they're probably going to burn out if they're doing that as well. Yeah. They may not even make it to high school if they're doing that.
Something's going to break.
Well, I love that. And that leads me, I'm going to take it in. Like, you growing up in Virginia, what was your dynamic like with playing sports, your mom and dad? You talked about it, you were the oldest of 6. How did your childhood look like in youth sports?
Most of my youth sports, I grew up playing soccer. And so I tell people all the time, you remember Pele, the soccer player? Yeah. Man, they used to call me Bene. I was the man all the way up until 8th grade. Soccer was my thing. I loved football, knew I wanted to play football, but my parents didn't want me to play tackle. I played 1 year Little League tackle football. My dad was the coach. That was my only year. That was his only year coaching because I think the kids drove him crazy. I just played soccer growing up, and I really didn't play any kind of youth. I didn't really play any travel. Most of my sports was at the school. So by the time I got to middle school and high school, it was, football in the fall. It was, basketball in the wintertime. And then when I got in high school, it was track in the spring. And that's kind of what I did. And also being that we were in a bigger family, it was, everybody could do kind of one sport. There wasn't the total dedication to one kid doing something all the time, just because logistically it didn't work. But I did a lot of playing around in the neighborhood. I played football in the street with my friends like every single day after school, tackling on the sidelines where there was grass, and that was part of the athleticism. You walk up the street to the basketball hoop at the school, and kids from other neighborhoods would come out, and inevitably there'll be a fight, and then everybody would go home. And so that was my youth sport experience.
How did you end up choosing going to Duke? At first, I know obviously you transferred, but your first choice was Duke. How did you make that choice?
I ended up going to Duke. I narrowed it down to Georgia Tech, Duke, Notre Dame, and Clemson. And honestly, I really wanted to go to Notre Dame. I love the movie Rudy. Don't laugh at me.
It's a great movie. I'm with you, man.
My kids think it's corny, but I love
Rudy's the only movie these two guys could ever think about playing college football. So
thanks, Jeff. I appreciate that, Jeff. Thank you.
So I love Rudy and Notre Dame, and I remember I was about to go on my official visit, and literally I'm at my aunt's house who lived in Greenville. For some reason, I was flying out of Greenville, and the coach called me and said, "You don't have to come. We signed a tight end. We don't need you to come anymore." And I was crushed, like tears. So then I looked at Georgia Tech. I didn't really want to move to Atlanta. The FLA was too busy for me. I really loved Clemson, my visit to Clemson. I wasn't a fan of the coach then. It was Bowden. For some other reasons, I wasn't a fan of him, but I loved Clemson. And then Duke, I had this idea of what a great education. And so I chose Duke primarily, number one, because of the education. Number two, because they had a new coach coming in named Carl Franks from Florida. And, just the idea of starting something new there, building something well. Needless to say, after, winning 3 games and losing 8 games, and school was great, but football was atrocious. I decided to transfer. I wasn't recruited by Georgia out of high school. Didn't even get a letter from them out of high school. But when I was ready to transfer, I visited Georgia and Virginia Tech. And I really love what Coach Donnan was doing with his tight ends at Georgia. I would look at them online. I think it was dial-up online at that point, AOL. And I would check out what they were doing with the tight ends. And I just felt like I wanted to go to Georgia. I took a visit there and they offered me a scholarship, and that's where I ended up. I met my wife in FCA, and the rest is history. Go Dogs.
Yeah, it's been a pretty good run here.
Yeah, I was going to say
last few years. Hey, I want to go back to high school and youth sports a little bit. And you talked about, you were a soccer player, high school, you ran track. And so obviously I'm guessing you had a lot of speed. But Ben, were you always, in whatever you played, were you always very athletically gifted? Were you always kind of an elite player from the beginning?
What's interesting is, how in retrospect, people will say, I always knew you were going to be this. And you were always this. And you're thinking, no, I wasn't. I remember in high school, when we moved to South Carolina, I was in 10th grade and I was the only 10th grader. They said, do you want to play varsity or JV? And I said, well, I'm going to play varsity. I don't know why I chose varsity, but I remember being so terrified at practice from the bigger guys that I would go up to the locker room like I had to use the bathroom, and I would just sit there during practice so I could skip certain drills. so
I would say that is smart.
I'll be up there like, I gotta go use the bathroom, coach. I'll be back after 9 on 7.
After Oklahoma drill.
Exactly. I think throughout my career, my youth sports career in soccer, I was always pretty fast. I could always run. But as I got older, it got tougher. And I do think that I wouldn't say I was a late bloomer, but I will say that I was not always the biggest and strongest and fastest in my group. There were a lot of guys who, as you know, develop early. I think that's another thing that sometimes parents, I tell myself this as a parent of athletes, that the version of the kid that you see now, the version of your child athlete now, is not necessarily the version of he or she next year or 3 years from now. It could be a lot better. It could be a lot worse. And so for me, I wasn't always the best. I think that I got better as time went on, and I started to develop, I think physically, filling out, getting stronger and faster a little bit later. And then also to add to that, I learned my sport much better later on. Part of developing as an athlete is learning your sport. You could have a kid that's faster than everybody, can jump out of the gym, but have they learned how to play basketball? Have they spent the time to understand the fundamentals of the game? And that's why this whole conversation about youth sports gets kind of muddy, because there's really no way to predict these outcomes as much as we want to as coaches and as parents. We just have to continue to pour into them.
I want to add to that. You talk about coaches. You've played for a lot of great coaches. And, we talk a lot about the impact that coaches can have on our kids. Who was one or two of the coaches that really impacted your life, and how?
Well, I would say my high school football coach, a guy named Jimmy Wallace. He's you ever had that high school football coach that you still see him 20 years later and he's still strong? Like, he grabs you and you still feel like it was 1999. Like, dude, why are you so strong? I saw him recently.
High school coaches, they don't age, man. I feel the same way. They look the same 25 years later.
It's crazy. I just saw him like maybe a few weeks ago. I was back home, and I mean, the guy's 70-something years old now, and I still don't want to cross him. It's crazy, but I think he really, encouraged me and us when it came to how to play the game. Really, just the aggression of football, the discipline of football. I think he was my first really real football coach. I played in 9th grade in high school, and in 8th grade in Virginia. When I actually started in 9th grade playing in Virginia, but when I got to South Carolina, it was just a different animal. So he was one. And then I had another coach, a tight end coach, who before we would go out there to play, we would have a devotion, and we would talk about maybe a scripture, maybe a certain lesson he wanted to impart to us, and we would talk about that before we would go on the field. And even now, years later, I talk to some of the guys that I played with, and they talk about those times. We don't talk about on the field. We don't talk about practices as much, but he was a guy who really taught me not taught me about incorporating my faith into football, but he showed it. He demonstrated from a coach's standpoint on the influence that a coach could have. I had another coach in the league in Cleveland, and he's the one who told me, we had 4 kids at the time. We had moved to Cleveland, had our second kid. My wife was 9 months pregnant when we got to Cleveland. There was so much to do in Cleveland that we had 3 kids in 3 years. So we left there with 4 kids.
It's another podcast too, right?
Shout out,
dude! I played 3 years. I played 3 years in the AL Central. We went to Cleveland 3 times a year. I know what you're saying.
Shout out to Cleveland there.
Steve Hagan, he was my tight end coach, and I was just like, man, I've got 4 kids now. I had 3 of them, 4 with him, and I was just like, tired, just exhausted. And he told me, see, look, in parenting, the days are long, but the season is short. The days are long, but the season is short. And he told me that literally in the middle of practice. We were going in between drills, and we were just talking about fatherhood. And he told me that in the middle of practice in Cleveland, Ohio with the Browns. And I've held on to that because he's absolutely right. And now, again, my kids are still in the house. Nobody's graduated yet, but I look at just like that. We got one that's going in 10th grade. That time flies.
Happens fast. I got 4. I've got 4 will be out of the house. I got 2 left, and so it does. It happens really fast. But those days last forever sometimes.
Yeah,
Dude, forever. They're like epic. It's like when the sun steals still.
I know.
Well, all of mine are out of the house, so
that's why we do this at Britt's house.
That's
there ain't
right.
no kids
That's
here
right.
to
There's
bother
nobody
us.
running around.
So, well, they come back often. They come back often for meals, but
They never truly leave.
That's exactly right. You're never done paying for your kids. Just I'll give you all that little tip.
I thought you were giving me some encouragement, man.
Yeah, exactly. Before we kind of finish up here and ask, I got a few to ask on the back end. I know all of us were kind of wondering, I know this is a little different than youth sports, but college football today and the state of it, what's your opinion on everything that's going on and, where does it go?
Well, the last part of the question, I have no idea. Where does it go? I think it's going in the right direction. And to me, the right direction, we've been talking about this, and several years ago, even I was thinking like the way this has to go is for eventually players to be classified as employees in order to be paid by the universities. That brings on a whole bunch of other things. Is there a collective bargaining agreement? What about benefits? I mean, there's all these questions out there, but to have it cleanly so that athletes can be paid, I think that's where we're going to end up. I think that this most recent court decision kind of is leaning that way. But I also think this is a result of years and years of neglect and kicking the can down the road by the NCAA. And so when you have a situation where the Power 5 conferences are generating billions of dollars, and it's just becoming more and more and more. And now with technology, we're all seeing this more and more. I can open my social media and see a whole reel about how much money college football is making. When I was in college, we didn't know. Now it's all public, and I think that the great thing I see is that players are realizing their agency, that their power, which I think is always a good thing. But I also think the fact that this wasn't dealt with in an equitable manner going all the way back to the 90s as the game started to grow, that's why we're having this big fallout right now. And so where does it end up? I hope it ends up in a place where players are compensated some share of the revenue. I think that's fair. I also want to be in a place where there's guardrails and rules for things like NIL. There's consistency across the board. State to state, things are different now. That makes it difficult even for coaches. I think that when it comes to roster management, there's issues there. It's difficult for coaches to manage a roster where kids can transfer so quickly. And I'm a transfer. I think there's good things there. I had to sit out a year. I hated it. I wish I could have played immediately. So there's some pros and cons there. But I do think that we haven't seen the final version of what this is going to look like, but we're getting closer. The good thing, though, amongst all of this is that there's some compensation being given to players that is legal, that's not under the table. It's not in a plastic bag, although there's probably still some of that going on. We can move out of that, but it's an exciting time, I think, because the game is growing. I mean, you see how we've got conference expansion, and we talked earlier about how early kids are getting recruited. I think it's phenomenal for the game of college football, but within that, we also have to be mindful that these are 16, 17, 18-year-old kids. And some of these parents are kids too, just trying to figure it out. How do we make sure that these sorts of decisions, anytime money is involved, that's why scripture talks a lot about money, but it talks about the love of money, not necessarily money. But anytime the love of money gets involved by all these different entities, there's going to be casualties. And that's what you hate to see.
Ben, what's your take on the whole transfer process? And you've got teams like Clemson on one side, and Dabo feels pretty strongly what he believes, and they're not participating much. And you've got other teams and kids that are transferring 3-4 times. What's your take on where that?
You mean like FSU? They can only build their team through transfers. I'm a Clemson fan. So I got to give them a shot.
I mean, some teams have done it well. I mean, you look at Ole Miss, and there's half their team. Actually, last year I should know this stat off the top of my head, but they had something like 28 something transfers that were actually playing. I mean, you look at the polar opposites in a Clemson or an Ole Miss, and how they both use or not use the transfer portal. Firstly, as I said before, I think the ability to transfer is a good thing. I hated when coaches could leave, but a player was penalized. We've seen over and over again over the last several decades where a coach would leave, start coaching the next week. Perhaps he was part of a scandal. Maybe he just wanted another job, and he would leave. The kids he brought in are still there. If those kids want to leave, they've got to sit out a year. Then the rules change where those kids could leave. And now, I think, again, going to the roster management piece, it's about the windows of being able to transfer when you can and can't. And it's also about, there's kids that enter the transfer portal and don't get an offer. And we don't hear about those stories a lot of times. But there are kids that enter the transfer portal, and there's no guarantee that their former school is going to take them back if they don't get to go somewhere else. And who knows who's saying what to them about their value on the open market. So I love the movement. I love the ability to move. I think it makes it harder for fans who watch the game. It seems almost disloyal. It seems very transactional, and I understand that aspect of it as well. How can you get used to a player if he's only going to be there for a year or a year and a half and then leave to go somewhere else? But I think that's the landscape we're in. Dabo has decided what he's decided. I will be hard pressed to see him not adjust in the coming years, because that is what college football is now. Even when you look at the Heisman candidates, I was reading this stat of the last something like 10 Heisman quarterbacks or Heisman candidates that were in the finals for the Heisman as quarterbacks. Something like 8 of them out of the 10 were 80% were transfers.
Yeah, I think what's going to be interesting though is if the players do start getting paid, right, like employees, like you said, and if there's benefits, then the university is going to want guardrails like, you can't just leave after 1 year. It's almost like a player signs a 4-year deal. You're mine.
Exactly.
So I think that's where it's going to get. I think that's going to be the head-on collision right there. I do think players should get paid some. I absolutely do. Like you said, for years, the universities and NCAA was making millions and billions of dollars, and players were getting nothing. And so now it's gone, like you said, almost the other way. Where do you meet in the middle?
Well, the other thing, too, that I want Ben's thoughts on is that coaches always adjust. I mean, it's their job. So they're going to adjust to the system for better or for worse. And what they've done is they're not recruiting out of high school as much. They're just recruiting FCS kids or recruiting other D1 kids. And on the other side, the good news, I guess, for athletes is they're free agents now. They have the opportunity to go to better situations. But are they losing something in that? And I think that's fair. But are they losing the college experience? Like your college experience at Georgia, being there for 3 or 4 years and being a student, not just an athlete. Are they losing that college experience, or is that something that really is not the goal anymore for these kids? And I know it's not the goal for some of these kids who are going to be able to play on Sundays, but for the other kids, are they losing some of those friendships? Are they losing some of those opportunities to make connections in the business world?
They are, but I think it kind of full circle comes back to the conversation about the kid who practices 365 days a year. And we were talking about the parents and what are they losing? Are they falling behind? Yeah, you're losing something, but what are you gaining? And when I think about college, the goal, I think for everybody that goes to an institution, athlete, student athlete, non-athlete, everybody that goes, their hope is to go there to hopefully find a job. That's the point of you getting your degree, or the point of you even going to college for most people. Now, some people want to go party, of course. There's always those folks. But that's part of the reason why you go. And so to me, if you're able to do that and to earn by perhaps going to another place and receiving X amount of dollars, even if it's, nothing humongous, but, compensation, to me, that's part of the reason why you go. Are you losing some of that stuff that we enjoyed in college? Yes, I think you are. But are you willing to sacrifice that? Well, I think for a lot of these kids, that they don't know what they don't know. And so they can hear us talk about, man, you're missing all the friendships, and you're missing, hanging out at the dorm. And they're thinking, but I can drive my whatever car and I can go pick people up and go somewhere. And I'm thinking, well, if I was in college, I probably wouldn't do that too. And so there are a lot of things that are just different now. But I don't think it's fair to put that on them, because it's just a different generation. The main thing, though, I always harp on is I want to give them agency, allow them to be compensated, but also want to protect them from the sharks in the water. Because anytime there's no guardrails and there's more opportunities for money involved, people are going to, it's the same conversation we always have when guys get out of the college and they prepare for the NFL, and we talk about agents. Not saying all agents were bad and agents aren't necessary. I believe they are. But we always see.
But 80% are bad.
But it's the money and the opportunity for it that brings people into this cauldron, and then there are those who are lied to, and again, they're kids. Even though they look grown, they're still kids.
Great points. Ben, we got time for 2 more questions, and I really want to ask you this, because you caught balls from 2 of the best who ever threw them, Brady and Brees, and they were super successful and recognized as leaders. I'd like to know what they were similar in, and then I'd also like to hear how they were different in terms of approach, in terms of leadership. What made those guys successful from your viewpoint?
Yeah, for both of them, it was continual preparation. I remember flying home from Green Bay. This was 2009 or so. We had played the Packers. I was playing, actually probably was before that, maybe 2006. We had played the Packers, won the game. We're on the plane coming back. I go to the back of the plane, pass by Tom. I'm talking to him, and he has the film open, the computer open, and he's watching film of our next opponent. We haven't even landed yet. He's watching the next week. Didn't have a chance to even. He didn't really want to talk about the game that we just played. He's like, "Hey man, next week we're gonna run things this way." I'm like, "Dude, I haven't even gotten sore yet from this game." And so it was the continual preparation, the continual, thinking about what's next, how to do things better, how to improve. Is that I remember one time when I got to New Orleans, I first gotten there. My first year there was 2013, and I walk into the field house, and it's pretty dark in there. And this was probably maybe it was a Saturday morning before a game. So Saturday mornings you come in, you have a meeting really quickly. A lot of guys get in hot tub, cold tub, do all that sort of thing. Last little bit of film. You have meetings, have a walkthrough, you go home, you come back to the hotel. Well, this was early on a Saturday. I think I came in there for a treatment or something like that. And I walk into the field house. It's dark in there. And I see an image on like the 50-yard line moving around. And I'm trying to figure out who that is. And it's my first year being in New Orleans with the Saints. And the strength coach tells me, "Oh, that's Drew out there. He's going through the playbook." I'm thinking, hold on. We're going to do a whole walkthrough. And Sean Payton's walkthroughs take like an hour and a half. And there aren't walkthroughs. He expects us to run. The defense walks, the receivers, we run. But Drew was out there going through every play, every read, pointing at all of his reads as he turned and shot his arm, saying, "I'm going to do the check down here. I'm going to throw the ball deep here. I'm going to do all those sorts of things on his own." Are those two guys, anomalies? No, I don't think so. I think other people might do those sorts of things, but to do it continuously over decades, I think what sets them apart. And then, obviously I think the difference is everybody has their own quirks. You'll never see Drew yelling at people during a game on national television when their mom's watching. Tom Brady will embarrass you. And he has no problem doing that. So they definitely have different game day leadership styles, but they both are just the ultimate competitors and really two guys who I greatly respect and have become good friends.
Well, I think Tom got it paid back to him about 3-4 weeks ago in that roast. I don't know if he'll ever do that again.
Oh man, that was hard. I watched some of it. It was hard to watch.
Our last question for you, man, thank you for your time, is just what's your best advice to the athletes as they go through their journey growing up? And what's your advice to the parents of these athletes?
Well, to the athletes, I think there's a lot of things I could say about preparation, determination, character, focus, never giving up, always having a goal in front of you, being relentless, being tough. I could give a lot of advice there, but I think the number one thing for the athlete is identity. And what I mean by identity is knowing that their sport, as all-encompassing as it will be and needs to be for you to be good, you need to be fully immersed in your sport, especially as you get older and older, from middle school to high school to college, obviously in the pros. Total immersion in what you're doing is what begets excellence. But at the same time, my advice to you is to never link your identity to your performance. And that's hard to do as an athlete. We grow up playing the sport, loving the sport, getting pats on the back because of the sport, getting paid because of the sport, meeting our spouse because of the sport. I met my spouse in FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes. She was playing softball. Like the sport of football has been a part of my life I'm 43 now, but probably for a good 33 of it, I was thinking about football. But how do we decouple your identity, meaning your value as a person, your value as a creation of an almighty God who loves you and died for you. How do you separate that from your performance is the key piece of advice I would give to an athlete. Don't allow your performance to become your identity, because if you do, you will ride a roller coaster of emotion, not only in your sports and athletic life, but throughout all of your life. If your performance is always tied to your identity, you are valuable because of who he has made you to be and because he loves you and died for you. And also because there are so many people who care about you outside of your ability to perform. That's why you're valuable, not because of what you can do. To the parents of young kids, relax. Relax. Your kid's entire future does not depend on this one game or this one practice or even this one season. It doesn't depend on it. We don't know what tomorrow brings. We don't know. I mean, I'm going to be honest. I got a kid. My daughter. Hopefully she doesn't watch this. But I think she can be like an amazing tennis player. She's 8 years old. That's my dream for her. She doesn't want to play tennis at all. And I'm looking at her like, girl, you know, like you could be a really great tennis player, I think. She wants to do all of these other things, and I'm just sitting here frustrated, pulling my hair out. And somebody told me, look, if she really wants to do it, she will come back to it. And if it's to be the time off that she has now, when she wants to do it, and then she has the opportunity to do it, and those two things come together, that's when she's going to maximize. A kid is not going to maximize their potential being forced to go to practice and hating every single minute of it while you're sitting there hot and you don't even have to be there. Go do something else. And so my advice to parents is relax. My other piece of advice is to prioritize your family over the possibility of future athletic success. Prioritize your family right now over the future of athletic success. As difficult as it may be, as much as you feel the pressure from everybody else, to not do that, because you can't get these days back.
I can't thank you enough. Again, I always say it, I'm lucky enough, man. I got to hang around you for 3 days, and it impacted my life, and I know this will impact a lot of other people. So we thank you for spending time. I know you got to get back to your 7 crazy kids, because I'll be going home to my 4 here soon.
You probably heard them a couple times in there.
Oh, that's the best,
that's
man.
Great.
Yeah, they're
that's
ready
great.
for you. But hey, thank you for spending time with us, man.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate what y'all are doing. Y'all are doing a great work that is impacting a lot of parents in a mighty way. I've heard from some parents, honestly, recently, that have been impacted by what you all are doing. So keep up the good work. Appreciate it.
Hey guys, Jeff Francoeur here. Thanks for checking out Pure Athlete, and subscribe to our channel on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you go to listen to our podcast.